Welcome to The Pilot Life, the show where we sit down with people who are passionate about aviation. My name is Brendan. I've been a commercial airline pilot for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard some incredible stories. This is the show that I share those with you. Welcome on board. Yeah, welcome back to The Pilot Life.
Thank you.
John, it's good to have you with us here. We are here with John Swanson in the Condor Squadron again.
Here we go.
This is episode 2 from the pretty soon you're going to be careful because we're just going to turn this into the southern base of the podcast studios here.
There's a few more you could interview here.
Oh, yeah. I bet. Well, we're down here in Van Nuys. Beautiful afternoon here. Van Nuys, California with I'm going to call you Captain John Swanson here. Started off as a military pilot, eventually went to an airline pilot, and then a corporate pilot. So
3 wonderful aviation careers.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it. So why don't we start with maybe where kind of that first spark for aviation started for you?
I grew up in northwestern Kansas, and a small town called Sharon Springs, and had an aunt and uncle that lived there also, and my uncle had a huge farm, and he was a private pilot.
Oh, he was?
He soloed back in the early 1920s.
Wow.
And no more than a private pilot, but through his life he owned approximately 60 airplanes.
Wow.
And I can remember growing up being either in his back seat or his right seat, and I know that's what sparked my love of aviation.
Yeah, incredible. So would he just then fly off of his farm there? Did he have a little
strip
there?
Most of the time he did, and then there was one period back in the 50s where he had a crop dusting business too.
Yeah.
That was before, the FAA really got involved with all the commercial side of it all.
Right.
And he did that for, several years, and then basically sold the crop dusting business to someone else.
Yeah.
But he always had an airplane on the farm. He had an airstrip on the farm and a hangar, and eventually 3 hangars. But
oh my gosh.
That's how I grew up.
So what was your very first flight in? Do you remember?
Too many years ago.
Yeah.
Probably some type of a Piper Cub.
Yeah. Okay.
Could have been a 172 for that matter too.
Yeah.
But he had a number of different airplanes.
Okay.
I know the one that he had one time promised me he would sell to me was a Citabra. At the age of 65, he goes down to Deer Valley, or Deer Park, I guess, in the North Phoenix suburbs.
Yeah. And
takes an aerobatics course in a Citabra. Within a week, he had ordered a Citabra, and he and my aunt went up to Wisconsin, and picked the airplane up, flew it back home, and I had a number of flights in that.
Cool.
And after Southeast Asia, I had about a month off vacation, and I ended up flying his Citabra a few times. I had a lot of tail dragger time at that point, and mostly in bird dogs and Cessna 185s. Air Force called a U-17.
Yeah.
And he took me up, put me in the front seat on the first flight with him back from Southeast Asia, and we did some aerobatic work, came back and landed, and he says, "You know where the keys are. Take it anytime you want."
Wow, cool.
For the next, 2 or 3 weeks, I had a great time in that airplane.
Yeah.
And
so did you always then have dreams of being a pilot, or did you have other goals as a young man?
You never know when you're that young.
Yeah.
One time, if I couldn't be a pilot, I think I would have ended up potentially as some type of a school teacher, probably high school.
Yeah.
Math and science was always an interest to me. I think that's one possibility. We had a number of medical people in our family, doctors and nurses, including my mother, and that's maybe a fallback position. I was thinking about medical school.
Yeah. Do you go into the Air Force right out of high school, or tell me about your kind of...
Graduated from high school in 1964, and I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the Air Force Academy. So June 29th, 1964, went to Colorado Springs and started the basic summer, and graduated in 68. Well, the spring semester of 68, had a program there to fly 241s, and you could get your private ticket. And so that's what I did. So I literally soloed, I think it was on the 16th of March of 68.
Yep.
and T-41s, which is a military version of a Cessna 172.
Okay.
Because of the altitude, they had a little bigger engines up there. So after I graduated, I went to Laredo Air Force Base, Texas, for pilot training, which is a year long. I became a forward air controller in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. It was about a 9-month lead-in program to do that. And you go through survival schools. I had to go through an air-to-ground gunnery course, AT-33s at Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico, Clovis, New Mexico, and then OV-10 training down in Hurlburt Field in the Eglin Complex in the Florida Panhandle.
So what does the forward air controller do, maybe for someone who doesn't understand that?
Basically, you do 3 different things. Smaller airplanes, you do visual reconnaissance, basically look for bad guys, supplies, vehicles, things like that. The second phase is then you would direct airstrikes on those particular targets that you've discovered and or have intel on.
Yeah.
And then the third is we were also trained to be an observer and literally direct artillery, the Army artillery. And
okay.
About 8 months into my experience as a forward air controller, it was Helix 2-3 was my call sign. I volunteered for and was accepted into, at the time, a classified program that had several different names. And I became a Raven-FAC forward air controller in the country of Laos, flying unmarked airplanes and blue jeans. In 1962, there was an agreement of those Southeast Asia countries to have Laos stay neutral.
Okay.
The North Vietnamese, even though they signed the agreement, did not live up to the agreement. And so from the early 60s on, the U.S., primarily through the CIA, were doing support operations for the local Lao and Hmong people that were more oriented towards the West, not towards the communists.
I see. So when you first went over there, you were flying the OV-10?
OV-10 right? Bronco, yes.
Okay. Did you join the Ravens, or I mean, was it a separate group, or was it?
It was a separate group.
It was a separate group of forward air controllers.
Mm-hmm. It was all volunteer. You had to go through an acceptance process, and then it was attrition. Somebody left or was killed, and you replaced them. The whole program was called Project 404, and the Air Force portion of it was called the Steve Canyon program.
Okay.
So we were hired into the Steve Canyon program under Project 404, and Laos was divided into 5 military regions, and I worked in what they call Military Region 2 or MR2, which where the Plain of Jars is in north central Laos. There were Ravens basically from 1966 to 1973.
Okay.
Prior to the Ravens, there were some combat air controllers that used the call sign Butterfly. So there were a total of 205 individuals that were part of either the Butterfly and the Raven program. 192 Ravens and the rest were Butterflies.
I see.
Which were primarily senior enlisted folks or enlisted folks who were combat air controllers.
You're flying over Laos, and are you just looking for enemy action or enemy activity?
We were around the Plain de Jars. It was a target-rich environment. You could always find supplies, you could always find vehicles, and you always could find people.
Gotcha.
Probably the one mission that I will never forget was watching one of my best friends and classmates from the Air Force Academy die. 4 of us were literally looking for an artillery piece that the North Vietnamese had set up, shooting at one of our friendly sites on mountaintops. We call them Lima sites or landing sites. We were like 4 points of the clock, just circling around an area. We knew about where the gun was. We just were having a hard time finding it. And then my friend Grant Ewells, he said, "They're shooting at me." And I was sort of on the opposite side of the circle as the 4 of us were circling around. And And then the next thing you know, you look over there and you saw the smoke coming from the airplane. It was a bird dog, an O-1. And it just, went into the ground at a relatively reasonable rate of descent. But as soon as it hit the ground, fuel tank, winds broke, fuel tank ruptured, and a fireball. And one of the Ravens did a very low pass, and sure enough, he was dead. He was in it.
Yeah.
That mission I will never forget.
Wow.
Later on, when I was living up in Oregon, and this was just probably about 7 or 8 years ago, on Memorial Day, I knew that Grant always claimed South Dakota is home. So on Memorial Day, I'm doing a search on the computer to try to find out, can I come up with Grant's parents? I just had a drive to want to talk to them.
Yeah.
I was able to find his mother and dad's name. So now I'm searching for his mother and dad's name. Come to find out, there was a link to a place over on the Oregon coast. So I keep searching, all on Memorial Day.
Yeah.
I find a telephone number. I call the telephone number. Long story short, his mother answers.
Wow.
She did not know how he had died. So I was able to provide her closure of that experience. And you asked me about something I remember about the Raven experience. That one I will never forget.
Wow, how special for her, too, to have one of his, classmates and fellow pilots who was there with him.
And a witness.
Yeah, and a witness.
And they did not know. It ends up that approximately 2 weeks before they were notified that they had gotten the remains, they did a private memorial service. And then 2 weeks later, and this is back in 71,
yeah,
2 weeks later, about May time frame, we controlled that part of the PDJ. They were able to get the remains out of the airplane and start its trip in a body bag back home. And it was, again, later, years later, when I was able to finally give her closure. Unfortunately, the dad had passed away already. Yeah. But
so then you come back. Do you come back to stateside?
I come back to stateside. I left Laos in mid-August of 71, and I was assigned to become a T-38 instructor back in Laredo Air Force
Base. There you go, yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
So I did that for 2 years. 73, Nixon was president, I believe, and there was a Democrat representative, a gentleman by the name Gonzalez, that Nixon didn't like, and he ended up closing Laredo Air Force Base.
Oh.
So I moved to Columbus, Mississippi. I was there for 18 months, volunteered, and was accepted into the U-2 program. And
okay, so was that a dream of yours to fly that plane? Or, I mean, because, a lot of times when I talk to people who flew in the military, it was like, no, I wanted to be in the fighters, right? Or I wanted to be a tanker pilot. How did that come about? Was there other opportunities for you, or is it just you were already part of some kind of the secret pilot group with the Ravens? Was that?
Well, it was more a case of you get exposed to the U-2. Like one of my graduation, we had a U-2 flyby on the graduation days.
Yeah.
There's several days of celebration there
right
at the end. And then, of course, about the program, and I ended up having several friends that were accepted in the U-2 program. This is mid-'70s. It was hard to get a fighter slot anymore unless you got it out of pilot training, because the Air Force was downsizing at that particular point too. And my friend said, "This is a good thing." It must have been, because I spent the next 13 years in the business.
So tell me about that. So you go and you join that squadron. And for those people who maybe don't know what the U-2 is, kind of talk about how it came to be.
Okay. Let me first talk about the selection process.
Yeah.
It's all volunteer. You'll go, if you are selected, to go out to interview. It's about, at least during my time frame, about a 10-day to 2-week process where you will meet individuals in the squadron and in the wing, and And if they like what they see on the first couple of days, then you'll go fly the U-2 in two-seat trainer to see what your flying skills are. And then at the end of that week, there's a secret vote. And I say, sort of laughing about it.
Right.
It's actually a conference between everybody that you've interviewed with, including the wing staff, to say, is he a good fit? Is she a good fit? How do we want to hire that person or not? And I can't tell you what the percentage is, but during my time frame, about 50% of the people interviewed were not selected.
Yeah. Do you remember that first flight?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you front seat or back seat when you're going up for this interview flight?
In the first flight, you're in the back seat.
Okay.
Actually, I think during the interview process in the two-seater, you're always in the back seat. What they're looking for is they don't expect you to be perfect on the first day or the first landing. What they're looking for is progress. Are you making the adjustments? Are you starting to see the height above? Because the theory of landing the airplane is you're basically going to stall it in the air to keep it on the ground. But that stall is from about 1 to 2 feet. Everything you do in the U-2 is a two-man concept. So when you're landing, there's another U-2 pilot who's in a chase car giving radio calls of what your height is above the runway, and if you need left rudder or right rudder, maybe something like hold it off because you're ready to touch down, but you're not ready to stall yet.
Right.
And there's a whole litany that we call him the mobile. Will call as you're doing the landing. Well, of course, in the interview phase, you have an instructor in the airplane too, and he's giving you advice.
Why is it important to land it at a stall?
Because it's a powered glider, very efficient powered glider. And if you touch down too soon, the potential is one wing could fly up, the other one hits the runway, and it could set up a cartwheel. Early part of the program, when your first ride was solo in the mid-50s, literally till mid-60s, your first ride in the airplane was a solo ride. Now, you might have had some tail wheel experience, but unfortunately we killed a few people in those early parts of the program in the training, and that was typically what was a setup, is touch down too fast, and then maybe jerking it had a yoke in it, jerking too hard, coming back airborne, stalling them, but now you're 10 or 15 feet in the ground. It may fall off on a wing and set up this potentially tragic event. So, that was why the instructors within the two-seater, and that's actually why they came to devise a two-seat trainer. They initially built the first two-seat trainer out of crashed U-2 parts and made a second cockpit where the equipment bay is behind the cockpit.
Wow.
So it was a labor of love.
Yeah.
And when you're around the airplane, you're with people that were that love to fly, and there was a lot of homogeneousness between the pilots. We had our characters.
Yeah.
Every unit does. But the neat thing is that we all were there for this mission, and the mission is now what you initially asked me about. It's intelligence gathering. The first U-2 that flew, the first U-2 flight was on the 1st of August of 1955. It was developed as a platform to carry a very sophisticated camera, and that was all, to go look at missile fields, see what the Soviets were doing over their territory. As time went on, it became a wonderful platform for high altitude. And so that was what they call photo intelligence. And then they said, well, now it's high altitude, maybe we can put some radios on it and listen to people. That became communications intelligence. And then maybe we can look what their SAMs are doing, what their missile defense systems are doing. And that became signals intelligence. And now it's a platform that carries all this simultaneously, has a capability of pumping that air that information that gets gathered anywhere in the world, near real time, which, what does that mean? Probably less than 5 seconds.
Right.
And it's used for, our leaders, to include the president, potentially, to make these decisions based on the best intelligence you have the time, and from collecting it to be able to provide that in a minimum time is very important for all of us. So
I recently saw, now you see people, because they can have the cameras filming themselves up flying these airplanes, and you've probably seen some of these shots of, it looks like they're on the edge of space. It's completely black around them.
You're above about 97% of the atmosphere.
Yeah. Can you walk us through, if I was a new pilot, what would a typical mission day look like for you? From like when you check in, what kind of pre-brief would you do, and then kind of altitude, anything that you're able to share, obviously.
Well, there's a couple different types of missions. Ones are sort of standard missions that you do most every day, and then occasionally the world environment will create the need for a one-off flight.
Yeah.
I'll talk less about that, but now you're taking an airplane, you're taking a minimum crew, minimum support, flying somewhere in the world to go do a one-off mission. Again, it's intelligence gathering, and it could be the 3 N's,
Right.
Photo intelligence, the signals intelligence, communication intelligence. But for the most part, your day was a relatively long day. There's a limit that the Air Force puts on how much time you can fly above in a high altitude. And that's changed some these days because of changing of the cockpit environment in the U-2. But during my time, your day started a couple days before. You probably had an off day, and then you were going to be the mobile or the backup pilot and the ground support person, the safety observer for the primary mission pilot that day. So if he got sick, you were going to go fly the mission. But if you didn't get sick, then it was your ground day. So, you were going to go eat breakfast with him. It started probably 2.5 hours before the takeoff time, so that you could start dressing in the spacesuit about an hour and 20 minutes before takeoff, because you had to be on oxygen an hour before takeoff to get rid of what probably about 95% of the nitrogen in your body. Okay. So you don't get the bends when you go to altitude.
Right.
You'd go have typically a steak and egg breakfast. Okay. If you're in an overseas location, you've arranged if you're on a base of some nature with a dining hall to provide that.
Why?
You wanted high protein, low residue.
Gotcha. I like the way you.
You want me to explain more?
No. I just love that. That's why you did it.
So at about an hour and 20, the primary pilot can start dressing in a spacesuit. Now, while he's doing that, you as the mobile go out and pre-flight the airplane, set up the cockpit. You know what he likes and where he likes things. And you're doing the whole pre-flight of the airplane, because you can't really do that in the spacesuit.
Yeah.
And then roughly about 30 minutes, plus or minus some, before takeoff, life support people will bring the pilot out to the airplane and then start strapping him in. But everything in the U-2 business is a two-man concept. There's 2 pilots that are involved in go flying any one mission. In the life support side, there's at least 2 life support people that are, one helps dress, the other one will observe, and then at some point in there, they will reverse roles. One will read the checklist to make sure they've gotten through the other one, and then they'll check off every item. At some time before the scheduled takeoff, you're going to have to take taxi to the runway. U-2 has about 6.5 degrees of tail wheel steering. It's not uncommon in some places that you would get some of the ground folks, or maintenance folks, to be on a wingtip, some along the fuselage, and lever the airplane around corners.
And is there like little stands for the wingtips?
About halfway between the fuselage and the wingtip itself, They have ground assist wheels we call pogos.
Okay.
Sort of look like a pogo in a little bit. On takeoff, as the wings flex up, these ground assist wheels, the pogos, will drop to the runway. And then as the airplane's taken off, the maintenance guys are grabbing the pogos, putting the pickup or whatever vehicle they have, clearing the runway.
Got it. Got it.
So yeah, it's a labor-intensive thing.
Yeah.
So typical missions, 9 to 10 hours. Can be longer, can be shorter. Shortest operational sortie I ever flew, true operational sortie, was less than 2 hours. And I had one that was over 12. So, but typically with 9 to 10 hours, and that's sort of what it is.
Yeah. Are you able to share like the altitude and the range and all that of the aircraft? Is that stuff out there? Is that stuff public knowledge?
Because the airplanes are still flying, I'm not willing to share precise altitudes, but our standard answer is above 70,000 feet.
I love you guys. And are you able to aerial refuel?
No, don't need to.
You don't need to.
You exceed the capability of the pilot at that point.
Right.
But I have flown from Beale Air Force Base near Sacramento to England.
Yeah.
Direct.
Wow.
So,
did you ever have those moments where you're up, where we see these pictures of the pilots up near space, and you just look out the window and think, "Oh my gosh"?
Absolutely. One of the things about the interview process is that you don't think you're claustrophobic. Some people aren't. I was fortunate enough not to be.
Yeah.
But you put them in a spacesuit and let them sit there for 2 hours just to see what happens. Because once you close the visor in the spacesuit, you're there by yourself. And you can hear yourself breathe. Mm-hmm. You start thinking about things that, about the environment you're in. And we've had occasionally people bail out of the interview process because they were too claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of the same thing when you're single seat at altitude. You're in the spacesuit. You are high enough. Yes, you do see the curvature of the Earth. Yes, you're right. If I look straight overhead, it's a black, blue, black. You can't really see stars, but you'll see stars sooner than most everyone will, except maybe the people on the space station.
Right.
And yes, there's an isolation that some people have to sort of fight through and deal with. I just marveled at what you could see, and that was my. I'm fortunate to be one of just a little over 1,100 U-2 pilots in almost 70 years of flying the airplane.
Dang.
1st of August next year, it'll be 70 years.
Wow! Congratulations. That's incredible.
In early August, I went back up to Beale for what we call a solo party for potentially the last 3 people that have soloed the airplane. And the numbers were 11, 14, 15, and 16. So 1,116 pilots, to include some Chinese pilots, Taiwanese pilots, some British, and some Navy people.
Wow.
So it's a small fraternity.
You fly it for 13 years?
Well, I actually flew 9 of the 13.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I was, a line pilot. I was then an instructor, then a flight examiner, and then I went to 2 years to Minot, North Dakota. Why not? Reason's the reason.
God bless you.
As a staff officer for what was called the SAC portion of what was called the RDJTF, the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force, which eventually became U.S. Central Command. Then I went to Auchenbury, England, in the TR-1, which is U-2 with a political name change.
Okay.
As the Chief of Stanival, or Chief Check Pilot. And then I was a detachment commander on the island of Cyprus for 13 months. And in my last 2 years, I was U-2 program manager at the Pentagon.
So then where does the aviation journey, because most people would think, wow, you just did all this service in the U-2, you're probably ready to be done, and that's it. But now your journey. So when did you retire from the Air Force?
1st of August of 88. Late 87 was the first time that some of the major airlines were beginning to hire military retirees. Before that, if you were older than about age 35, with commercial retirement age of 60, they give you 25 years, which for most of our programs was what they call full vestiture. You would get your max retirement pay. But in 87, and I believe it was Northwest and United that started at the beginning, and then Delta and American joined in, they would hire people knowing full well, those people would know full well that you couldn't go to 25 years because you're mandatory retirement age 60.
Right.
So I looked at it, and me having a new family, I was in a fortunate position that my wife Lori at the time supported me in whatever way I wanted to go. And so I chose to go ahead and retire, and then went through the interview process and got selected by Delta, and I went to Delta for 17 years. So
nice to have someone who has your back and supports you in those, because as a pilot we commonly have to make those decisions of, I'm going to go start over here, or I'm going to go start over here in the pay, and to have someone there to support you through that is invaluable, right?
Well, I was very fortunate. When I was going through that true decision process, am I getting out or not?
Yeah.
I had worked for 3 generals that were in the Pentagon at the time, and I went to all 3 for career counseling. And I knew that there was potential that I was going to be promoted to colonel, full colonel. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. So to me, it was a win-win choice. So if I stayed in, I knew that I would probably have less time with the family just because of what people do as colonels, what their jobs are. And I felt the airline life would give me a little more time to learn to become dad.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my decision process.
Yeah.
And I don't regret it either. If I stayed in, I wouldn't have regretted that either. But my timing was good. I was never furloughed at Delta.
Yeah.
And we both have friends that have been furloughed more than once in some cases.
Yeah.
So I did that. I was fortunate enough to be able to fly 2.5 years as a flight engineer on a 727, and then 6 months on a DC-9 in the right seat, co-pilot. Another 5.5 years co-pilot, MD-88. And then 2.5 years right seat, 7576, and then left seat, MD-88 captain, and then I retired as a captain on 7576.
What was the move for you from a U-2 single pilot operation to a flight engineer on the 727?
That was an interesting question I was asked as I was going through the interview process. Somebody asked me exactly that question.
Yeah.
And my answer was, "What do you want in your coffee, sir?"
That's the old pilot joke, isn't it? The old pilot humor there. Yeah.
So, no, I didn't have an issue with it.
Yeah.
I think every once in a while, we both have friends that couldn't make that transition.
Yeah.
But in my case, it was not a big deal. You're around people that love airplanes.
Yeah.
I loved the experience. Once you adjust to, being gone, 3 or 4 days at a time, home 3 or 4 days, and repeat that. But I didn't mind.
Well, probably also because the U-2 was already operated as a crew operation anyway, so it's not like...
In some respects.
Right.
You're flying single seat, but...
Right.
But it was still a crew concept.
Yeah.
Because it was always a 2-man operation.
So you spend 17 years with Delta Airlines. Mm-hmm. Probably retired close to your 60th birthday?
I was...
Or did you get out a little earlier?
14 months away from age 60 retirement. Delta management was going after the pilot retirement plan to change it from what we call a defined benefit plan to a 401k system.
This is post 2001? Is that when all this happened?
Yeah, this is 2005.
Yeah, okay.
And so I know in the last 10 months at Delta, about 1,200 of us retired because we were going to lose a significant amount of retirement funds.
Right.
Well, I retired the 1st of August. 16th of September of '05. They did declare bankruptcy. They only went after the pilot retirement plan, and I still lost probably 50% of my retirement pay, but I was able to keep a lump sum portion that I would not have had if I'd stayed on property.
Right.
And with 14 months to go to mandatory age 60 retirement, it was going to be a very significant financial hit. So I bailed out. I tried 3 months of real retirement.
And you failed at that, huh?
I failed at that. So in November of, again, '05, I go through the interview process for NetJets, which is flying private jets. It's owned by Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, and got hired at NetJets and spent another 17 years flying private jets.
Incredible. How much flying time do you have now total?
Somewhere north of 21,000 hours.
Yeah.
I was able to fly 4 airplanes at NetJets. Initially started on a Citation 10.
Yeah.
Flew 2.5 years on the Citation 10, and then 8 years on the Dassault Falcon.
Right.
We had the Falcon 2000s. We had another one too that was international. I was on the 2000. 3.5 years on a Bombardier Global 5000 and 6000. And in the last 3.5 years, I was captain on the Citation Latitude.
Wow.
And it reached a point where I just sort of knew it was time to, hang it up.
Hang it up.
And so I was able to fly until I was almost 76, a month short of 76.
Yeah.
No, I had a good ride. NetJets was a great company to work for. I enjoyed the people I worked with, and literally flew around the world with it.
What was the difference between airline flying and then flying fractional for NetJets?
I was the bag ape.
You had to throw your own bags, huh?
And the passengers' bags.
And the passengers' bags. Keeps you limber, though,
More in common than there are differences.
Is there?
Once, the door closed, the environment was the same. Basically you're on two-man crews. If you're on an airplane that's doing long legs, it could be a 3 or 4 crewed airplane with, relief pilots on board.
Yeah.
So there was more in common than there was difference. Layovers were similar. We had a little different crew rest rules than they do in the 121 world, which is the commercial.
Yeah.
Most of the time I had a schedule where I was working a week on, week off. So, and usually by 6 p.m. in the evening they'd tell me what I was going to do the next day.
Right.
And 15% of the time it would change through the night, do something different when I woke up.
Yeah.
It was more the same.
If people want to read more about some of the experiences that you've had, I know you brought some books here of just something. What would be some places that people could go to read up about this stuff?
Potentially online.
Yeah.
The 2 books I show you literally are available online.
Yeah.
This is about Southeast Asia, the Raven Fact program that was there. It was written by Christopher Robbins, a British gentleman. He's unfortunately passed away. His widow is still involved in the publishing business of his books.
Okay.
He was also a playwright for a number of plays on Broadway, etc. So it's available. And the second one is another British gentleman by the name of Chris Pocock.
Okay.
He lives in London. He's one of these British people we always hear about that just absolutely fall in love with airplanes. And he has written a number of books about this. I've known him for a number of years.
Yeah.
But this is a sort of definitive history about the U-2s and the program. So,
is that the oxygen bottle that he's carrying? Is that what you carry?
Yes.
Is that tank?
Yeah.
And that's just to get you out to the airplane, and then the airplane has its own oxygen generation system?
It does 2 things. If you look, there's actually 2 hoses, a little hard to see, but a very small diameter hose, which is the oxygen, comes from this liquid oxygen generator.
Yeah.
The larger hose is for suit ventilation. When you're inside this balloon, if you don't have air circulating, it becomes very hot and very sticky very fast. So that is what we call suit ventilation. So, and again, you'd be into that situation starting about an hour before takeoff.
Yeah.
And they would unhook where these two hoses are hooked to the seat. That comes from the airplane. And from the time that they unhook the ventilation hose until you start the engine, you have no circulation.
It's getting hot.
Yeah.
It's getting hot up there in Sacramento, huh?
Well, I joined in Tucson.
Is it Beale?
Beale Air Force Base.
Beale's up there, yeah.
It can be hot up there, too.
Yeah.
One of my early training missions when I was at Davis-Monthan in Tucson, where I joined the unit.
Yeah.
It was a 105-degree day when the 810 Warthogs were just starting training at Davis-Monthan.
Yes.
One had an airplane issue, and so we couldn't taxi out because the runway was closed. So after about almost 30 minutes, I just said, "This is a training mission. Let's call it off."
Yeah.
It was about 160 in the cockpit.
And you're sitting in there in that suit with no air or no ventilation.
No air circulation at all.
Unbelievable.
And I know that's happened more than once.
Yeah.
Not just with me, but for many people.
Wow.
But that's Chris Pocock. Again, the nickname of the airplane is the Dragon Lady. And the pilots, what we would say is, some days you dance with the dragon, some days you dance with the lady, some days it's the same flight.
I could ask you a million questions about flying that airplane. Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You too.
And thank you for everyone for listening. Until next time.